Hello, and welcome to Materials for the Future. I'm Emma Stones, and I work at the University of Lincoln. I am based within the Foundation Studies Centre, and I teach on the Foundation Year programme. In this programme, I lead the chemistry module, and I'm here today to talk to you about smart materials as part of British Science Week. So the reason I've chosen smart materials is because I think it's an immensely interesting topic with some fascinating current uses and also future potential uses. So what I'm going to cover within this lecture is what smart materials are. I'm going to cover some examples of smart materials and also we're going to focus on the potential uses and future applications of smart materials. So to begin with, I have a definition of smart materials. So smart materials is basically any material that has a property that can be changed and controlled by some sort of external stimulus. So importantly, this is a change that is reversible, and there's loads of different stimuli that can affect materials. So these are some different categories of smart materials that I've got on the screen at the moment. So they can be shape changing, they can be self-sensing, they can even be self-healing. So just some examples of those. So shape changing, so things like braces, for example. So these are made up of a shape memory alloy called nitronol in the case of braces. And what this shape changing smart material does is it gets applied to the teeth. With the temperature of the mouth, this metal that actually makes up the brace contracts, which is different to, I mean, usually metals expand when they're heated, but in this case, this metal contracts. That applies pressure to the teeth, pulling them into line. That can help with reshaping. Another application of these shape-changing smart materials is within when you have surgical plates being used for repairs of bone fractures. So, for example, the surgical plate made up of this memory alloy can be applied, and the heat or the temperature of the human body will basically cause that surgical plate, once applied across the bone fracture, to again apply extra tension and more pressure as it returns to its original shape, putting more tension on the bone and aiding that healing process. Smart materials, they can be self-sensing. So they can change colour in response to things in the environment. So there's a couple of examples of these. So the external stimuli in this case, it could be to do with light, it could be temperature related, it could be to do with pH changes in water levels, even application of voltage. So on the screen here, you can see I've got a couple of applications of self-sensing materials. So we have here a colour changing spoons that could be used when feeding infants, check the temperature of the food before giving it to them. There's also here uses within security. So for instance, with notes, they have invisible markings that show up only when put under UV light. And again, that can be seen here. So these are examples of self-sensing materials. They can be self-healing. They've got some smart materials have got the ability to repair themselves. Again, this helps to extend the life of whatever product it is. An example of this that I've got today is self-healing concrete. So here we've got self-healing concrete. So this concrete is made up of a mixture. It's the concrete itself. It's also got dormant bacteria in, along with a food supply, ready for when that dormant bacteria becomes activated. So what happens with self-healing concrete is that if the concrete becomes cracked, as we have shown here, the moisture or water within the atmosphere will enter the crack. That will activate the dormant bacteria, which will then begin feeding on the food product that's within the concrete. And that will then release this material. So it releases a carbonate material, which is then able to heal and repair the crack present. So that's just a couple of examples of some of the different categories of smart materials and what they do. So obviously you can see from that, there's a lot of uses for different smart materials. They've got, a diverse, widespread range of uses. and they have applications and potential uses within engineering, within the scientific fields, industry, and also they have medical applications. So on this slide here, I've got some examples of further smart materials and different categories of smart materials. So a few of these I'm going to go through in more detail, but you can see they can be thermochromic. So the mug you may well be quite familiar with. You put a hot liquid into it, the mug changes in response to that. They can be photochromic, like these glasses, and again, they change this time in response to light. They can even be self-healing, as we've spoken about previously with the self-healing concrete. They can absorb shock, and they can be hydrochromic. So in this case, they're responding to water levels. So I will go through a few more of these applications over the next couple of slides. So firstly, we'll start with the thermochromic. So like I said, this is one you're probably quite familiar with. A more sort of interesting use, really, of smart materials, in particular the thermochromic kind of smart materials, is what the researchers at NASA have been doing. So researchers at NASA have developed a temperature-sensitive coating that's based on iron oxide that can be painted onto a surface. So it can be applied, for example, to a jet engine or to components of a jet engine. And this changes colour to indicate different temperatures. So it initially begins as this sort of reddish brown colour that we've got here. And gradually, as the temperature increases, the colour of the paint changes. This allows a quantifiable measurement of temperature. So this temperature-sensitive paint can register temperatures ranging from sort of 25 degrees Celsius right through up to 600 degrees Celsius. And again, there's sensors that can log and record the data from this type of material. So the benefits of this is that it's a low-cost type of technology. It's quite easy to apply, so it can be applied to large areas. It can be applied to smaller, areas within machinery and things like that. It can also easily be used to coat sort of complex shapes and again provide this type of measurement. So that's a really, really interesting application of thermochromic materials. My next example was the photochromic. So these are responsive to light. So the example I've got of a photochromic material is that of glasses. So these have photochromic lenses, so they're responsive to sunlight, to UV radiation. So these types of glasses, and you will likely have seen them when out and about, they darken on exposure to UV radiation. So when somebody goes out into the sunlight with these glasses on, the lenses darken, so they take on more of a sunglasser type appearance. When they go back inside, out of the UV radiation, they clear. So it can be a couple of minutes clearing, but the point is this is completely reversible. So the benefits of this type of technology being used in these glasses are that it helps to reduce costs for the wearer because they're only buying one pair of glasses as compared to two. It aids with UV protection and general eye health because we're protecting the eyes from the radiation from the sun. It also aids in convenience. So rather than somebody having to carry around two pairs of glasses, for example, one pair does the two jobs. Next, I've got this example of the self-healing phone screen. So again, this is quite a common sight these days, damaged phone screens. Researchers have been developing a self-healing phone screen. So what they've been able to do is to put a type of oil known as linseed oil into the plastic component of a phone screen. If the phone screen then gets damaged, so let's say somebody drops their phone, for example, the linseed oil is released from within the screen. So it's done as like microcapsules. That linseed oil then fills any cracks and on exposure to room temperature, that oil hardens and therefore repairs the phone. So it gets rid of any sort of visible damage there. So researchers have stated that takes approximately 20 minutes. So 20 minutes after cracking your phone, it could be repaired. Although this technology could be, the speed of it could be increased, for example, by exposure to UV light. So again, this could bring the time down to about 10 minutes for this repair. So you can see that material sort of responsive to multiple stimuli. So both the temperature and also if we're speeding it up, the exposure to the UV light. There's smart materials here that are sensitive to shock and react or change in response to shock. So for example, with phone screens, there's a smart material, it's a smart polymer that's quite soft, quite malleable, usually. However, when that's exposed to shock, like if somebody dropped, if they had a phone case like we've got shown here and that was dropped, it would immediately harden, protecting the case. So that's one example. So again, that could be used for protection of any electronic gadgets, phones, iPads, laptops. It's also been used in shockproof clothing. So for example, motorcycle clothing could have these layers embedded into the material, again, to provide extra protection in the event of an accident. My final example is a hydrochromic material. So this is an umbrella which has got a hydrochromic coating on it. So this changes colour in response to exposure to water. So you can see here, we've got the dry umbrella, which is just white. However, in the rain, this umbrella could become this multicoloured, or could develop this multicoloured pattern that we've got shown here. So this type of technology can be used, like we said, in the umbrella. It can also be used in raincoats, so adding a novelty value to the raincoat. This type of technology can also be used in plant pots. So plant pots can be made so that when the plant starts to dry out, again, the colour changes, and this can indicate to the person who keeps the plant that it needs watering. Okay, so again, it can be useful as a sort of visual sensor in that way as well. So there are all the different types of smart materials. So what we're going to focus on for some of this lecture is the potential applications for the future of smart materials in the form of smart or intelligent textiles. So these types of materials, in the same way as smart materials, are able to change or respond to different atmospheric conditions or different stimuli. So it could be to do with the atmosphere, like, for example, changing in weather conditions. It could be different environmental conditions. And there's one example I'll talk about in a moment in terms of camouflage, which is quite an interesting application of this type of technology. So again, this can be useful to give improved protection from the weather. It adds convenience if materials can change in response to weather. Also, and as we'll see in the next example, it can help with improved camouflage, which again is always going to be beneficial. So here, the researchers have been looking at electrochromic polymer materials and how they change colour. So electrochromic polymers are smart materials that change in response to a voltage being applied. So this voltage doesn't always have to be very big. It can be quite a low voltage that's applied. However, the change, and as you'll see on the next slide, is quite drastic and quite dramatic. So again, it's really a useful type of technology. So one application of this is within military armed forces and their uniforms, because this could allow improved camouflage. And this is an adaptive change, because this change can be sort of, the uniform can change in response to the environment, and then it can change back. So like the other types of smart material that we've looked at, this is completely reversible. So it almost brings Harry Potter's invisibility cloak to life, really, this type of technology. So these types of the types of materials that have been studied are known as switchable electrochromic materials. So basically, using an applied voltage, they can switch between different colours. So it's a prompt colour change. Obviously, it needs to be quick. It's also reversible. So researchers have found a electrochromic material that is able to shift between sort of the vegetation green colours and also sort of the sand tone conditions. And again, this will provide, if this was embedded into sort of military clothing, it would provide convenient and quick improved camouflage to these different conditions. So the current idea is that this could be activated via a button on an app. Is currently what researchers are sort of looking at. So we've looked at one application in terms of camouflage and in terms of military uniform. Here we're going to look at some smart materials, or an example of a smart material in nature. So this is a pine cone. So pine cones are a natural smart material. They're known as hygroscopic, which means they're able to hold water and attract water from the environment, and they can change shape in response to this. So here we have a pine cone in wet, cold conditions. And as you can see, it's completely closed up. The seeds can't disperse. However, in dry, warm conditions, the pine cone can open up, as we've got shown here. And again, the seeds will be able to disperse in these conditions. So this is an example of a smart material changing in response to water, but obviously it's a natural example of one. So this phenomena has been looked at in terms of providing inspiration for pine cone inspired fabric. So as we've got shown here, so this is just a quick diagram really to try and explain the points in relation to the inspiration of this fabric. So we have, again, a collection of pine cones. You can see how in humid and in dry environments, the pine cones can be closed up, as we have shown here, if it's sort of a damp, wet environment, or they can be opened up in a dry, warm environment. So this type of phenomena has been applied to developing fabrics. So the current idea is that fabrics could be made to operate in a similar way to the pine cones. So when it's dry and warm, the fabrics the fibres in the fabrics can open, allowing the coat, for example, to be breathable. However, if it rains, the fibres can close, like we had with the pine cone in those conditions, and that would basically offer greater protection from the elements. So again, that would be quite a beneficial example of that type of technology. It would enable convenience. People would only need to take one coat. And again, if the weather is, if people live in a climate where the weather is quite unpredictable and ever changing, that'd be quite a helpful, convenient application of this type of technology. So we're going to look at now an additional potential application of smart materials. So here we're going to be looking at the use of textiles in the fight against the current pandemic, and also as potential development of technology for future pandemics. So obviously a key fight, or a key sort of part of the fight against coronavirus has been the use of personal protective equipment. So masks, aprons, gloves, face shields, all that sort of equipment. The current idea is that smart materials may lead to the development of an intelligent PPE. So on the next slide, we'll look at how some of these some of this technology could be used for the development of that type of PPE. So intelligent PPE is able to protect. It's also able to detect, so it could have additional enhanced materials or electronic components within it that allows it to do something additional to current PPE. So the coronavirus, currently we know that can survive on cloth or textiles for a couple of days. However, it can survive on smooth materials, plastics and smooth surfaces, for example, for up to a week. So again, there can be possible contaminations, a possible contamination from the coronavirus. So being able to introduce antimicrobial or antiviral properties into PPE would obviously be highly beneficial. One thing that has been looked at by researchers is this idea of making the PPE self-decontaminating. So they found by incorporating a hydrophobic layer that can enable the masks, for instance, or the PPE to be self-cleaning, self-decontaminating, which can again aid in the reduction of the transmission of this virus. There's also this idea that the PPE could be used for virus detection. So systems could be incorporated into garments to detect the presence of the virus. So one example being face masks, as we've got shown here. So the current research has been done looking at enzymes present in a person infected with coronavirus. So research shows that somebody who has coronavirus exhales enzymes specific to that virus, and if technology could be embedded into masks, as we've got shown here, this technology could sense, could detect those enzymes. And here, this could be indicated via a colour change, like we've looked at previously. And this would be able to highlight that somebody was potentially infected, which is quite useful as a surveillance approach. Obviously, it wouldn't replace, or the intention at the moment is not for that to replace, proper coronavirus testing, but it would give somebody the indication that there's maybe something they need to go get looked at. So in terms of highlighting a potential problem, that would be quite useful. So this could be obviously embedded into masks. It could be something that's attached to a mask. Everybody's wearing masks currently. So again, that type of technology would be quite easily taken into society, really. Further potential applications, so not just for PPE, but also sort of monitoring and treatment of patients or people infected with coronavirus. Could be looking at using electronic sensors or textile-based strain sensors. So these can be used to monitor vital signs. So it could be used to look at things like blood pressure, temperature, people's breathing rate, oxygen saturation levels, and heart rate. So these types of sensors could be embedded into clothes, making them wearable. And obviously, this could continually log that type of information. There was also some suggestion that this type of technology could also be used for contact tracing. So if somebody were to wear a piece of PPE that could detect the virus, then they would be able to, or the PPE would be able to sort of be traced and be able to be used for contact tracing. And again, that's just a further potential application. So further studies have also looked at possibly embedding the material into face masks that are able to kill any viruses. Again, just trying to help stop the spread of that virus. Okay, so in summary, so we've looked at smart materials, we've looked at examples of what they are and how they've been incorporated into some products, and also potential future applications of smart materials. So some smart materials are multifunctional, so they can respond to a variety of different conditions, as we've looked at. We've looked at adaptive textiles, so those that are able to change colour. So, for example, the military uniform that we looked at being one example of an adaptive textile, able to change colour to aid with the camouflage. There was also the pine cone inspired fabric, for example, for making a coat that would be classed as being an adaptive textile. In that case, it's responding to changes in weather. We've then looked at intelligent PPE, which could be, used to increase of self-decontamination of PPE. It could be used to detect viruses, and there's also the possibility of contact tracing there as well. And then lastly, we've looked at textile-based sensors, again, which could be used for measuring and reporting of vital signs, for example, for patient healthcare. So as you can see, so research in this field is quite diverse, it's ongoing. The number and applications of smart materials will likely increase as obviously more research is done within the next decade. So if you wish to read a little bit more about some of the applications and uses of smart materials that I've spoken about today, these are the references that I've used. And I've also here included contact details for the university. Here is my email address there as well. If you had any particular questions that you wish to email through, obviously please do feel free to use that. Okay, so thank you for listening. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them into the comments I hope you found that interesting.